we have two pilots here. We have Charlie Finch and Doc Clement, who are in the 220th Airplane Reconnaissance Company. They were both pilots in that group. They were called the Cat Killers, and I'll let you ask them why they call it the Cat Killers. And we have this, the L-19 was their airplanes. It was the airplanes of choice selected by the Army at that time. This aircraft is owned by Randy Mayville. And Charlie Finch here, this is the one on the far side here. I'd like to say that I flew with Charlie for 20 years on the airline, and I never knew he was a hero. So I guess that's what real heroes will do. They don't tell you. So, but anyway, Charlie was a graduate of the University of Georgia. He couldn't get in college. He had to go to the University of Georgia. I went to Georgia Tech, by the way. He was in the Army from 1966 to 73, retired as a colonel in the reserves. Flight school 1968, Vietnam, June of 68, February of 70, 20 months, obviously not one tour of duty.
In there?
Delta Airlines from 73 to 2003. He won the Silver Star, the DFC, the Bronze Star, 38 Air Medals, 2 with Valor, Army Commendation Medal, and Master Aviation Badge. And Ed Doc Clement here, he was a high school all-conference player in 1963. Went to Austin Peay. He played football. He was in the Army from 1966 to 71, Vietnam, 68 and 69. Instructor pilot at Fort Rucker from 1970 to 71. Flight manager for Killarney Fruit Company, 1982. Vice President, Operations Caribbean Helicopter and the Virgin Islands, 1983 to 84. And Piedmont Airlines, 1985 to 2005. And his father was one of the original pilots for Piedmont Airlines. Is that correct? Now, Charlie, before we get started here, how about telling us, oh, is Tom here? Oh, this is Tom Jones, excuse me, folks. This is Colonel Tom Jones. He's a Marine, is a Marine. There's no such thing as an ex-Marine. And Tom, if we get further into this thing, you'll understand something about what their mission was. He was in charge of the backseaters that flew in the back seat, and he actually flew with Charlie one mission, and they are going to cover this later on. I don't know whether the Colonel wants this covered or not, but anyway, that's what they will. Okay. All right. Thanks for coming with us, Colonel. We didn't know that you were coming till the last minute. Okay, Charlie, would you tell us a little about the L-19 and the history behind it and why it was selected?
Is this thing hot? Okay, it is. I'll let Doc talk about the technical stuff. And they started building these things in 1950, and they started with Korea, and they changed them. Such they changed a lot of the models. But basically, what you see here, it was an L-19 that most of the old people like myself remembered as, and then when they started going into Vietnam in 1963 and 64 and 65, they changed their designations to an O-1. But it was always known as the Bird Dog. And it's not a long story why our unit was called the Cat Killers, by the way. But one of the early warrant officers, when he went over there, they said, "You're going to be flying the Bird Dog." And he said, "What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go kill cats with it?" That's how we got the name, and we've had to embarrass ourselves for the last 40-something years explaining that silly story. But we built, Cessna's built 2,100 of these. And in Vietnam, we had 630 that went over. We lost 50% of the airplanes. Now, a lot of it was for combat, but a lot of it was pilot error. A lot of it was the NVA destroyed them on the ground. So you're looking at a 50% attrition rate for this airplane. You don't see them very much. You still see them in the civilian air patrol. Some of the states have them. We have 3 or 4 in Atlanta. Several Delta pilots have them. Doc, you want to add?
This airplane right here was a pretty sturdy little bird, but it was overgross before we ever got in it due to the antennas. You see on the airplane, the rockets, And the parachutes that we had in the airplane that we never put on, we just used them for bullet bouncers. And this thing was so slow, when you got shot at, the only way you could evade the fire was get up and run around the cockpit. That's how slow it was. But it was only about 100 miles an hour, and it would climb about 500 or 600 feet a minute in combat attire. Back in the States we flew it, and you climb out about 1,500 feet a minute. We had 2 rockets on each wing, and they were 2.75s, and they were Willie Pete's white phosphorus, and we called them Willie Pete's. And that's what we would mark the target for the jets when they were coming in, so they could see the smoke rise up. And then you would give them from their run-in heading, you could tell them, okay, from my smoke, let's go 9 o'clock, 50 meters, and drop your first 250-pounder. But the airplane was pretty sturdy. We took a lot of hits in it, especially this guy right here, over 100 hits in it. And he's still talking about it. But anyhow, it was just a real hog as far as trying to take off and climb much. It just didn't do it. But it was a real good airplane to look out either side, and so you could see the target. Now, a lot of times, the visibility was so good in here, it was just ideal for it. And I'd fly along a lot of times. You think you see some down there, and once you go by, and I would look behind me, and I'd see the NVA look the face up, and you see the shiny face, so you knew they were there. Then you'd play around, and then bring in some artillery or tack air on them and surprise them. But anyhow, the airplane itself, I never had any problem with. I never lost the engine in it. I don't know anybody that did lose an engine in it. Vietnam, it was just a real bulletproof type airplane. And we abused them. We abused them bad. And they held up. So anyhow, that's about the airplane.
All right, let me ask you, well, Charlie, you can answer me this. What kind of training did you get before you went into the Cat Killers?
Those of us that were fortunate enough to get fixed-wing Army flight school, it had nothing to do about anything except about luck. For every 100 people that went to Army flight school, there was only one of us that got to fixed-wing. So we started out at Fort Stewart, Georgia, over by Savannah, and we flew 80 hours over there. And then we came to Fort Rucker for the other 4 months, and we actually had 40 to 50 hours in this airplane. And that's all the training we had. I think we had one mission that we actually learned to fire a rocket, but we learned to adjust artillery. We learned to do visual recon. The hardest thing, because we didn't have GPS back then, the hardest thing was navigating, because in Vietnam, a lot of the times the weather got so bad that we had to navigate we didn't have a VOR, ADF, or anything that would direct us, and we didn't have GCAs and stuff like that. So we had to learn, and it was fairly simple, but that was one of the things for tactics that we learned in flight school. But when we got to Vietnam, Doc and all of us, we only had about 45 hours. And our first missions, we were already in North Vietnam in our first week. And I'm not saying it was hard to do. Flying the airplane's fairly simple, but everybody assumes that you have all this expertise in flying this airplane. Well, most of our crashes at Fort Rucker, because I came back and taught them, most of our crashes at Rucker were going into 600-foot strips with high-density altitude, and your student would pull off the power and you'd just sink, and that, or you'd ground loop these things. These things are notorious for ground looping. So basically we had 40 hours when we went to Vietnam.
Okay, second, before you sit down, and then we'll get back to Charlie. What was the difference between your mission as a Cat Killer and other forward air controllers in the Army?
What happened, and Doc I'll let Doc address this first. When we got over there, this was, I'm not going to talk about how bad the war was fought, but picture yourself, everybody on this side is North Vietnamese. Everybody on this side is Marines. And so we kind of had a rule in the DMZ that if they came across, we could fight them and fight them well. Our Marines could never go into North Vietnam. We know it's silly, but that's what they did. You could actually see North Vietnamese standing here and the Marines on the other side, and they weren't shooting at each other. But what they did was they brought all their artillery pieces down from Hanoi and everything, and they put them right where you're standing, and they could go 15 to 20 miles. Well, now we have a fight, and the Army, in their infinite wisdom, asked us to go up during daylight hours to go find the artillery pieces and destroy them. Well, that became a very different mission, because in the South, they were just looking for the Viet Cong and the people in black pajamas. We were against regular NVA troops with pith helmets and everything else. And they would hide all of their weapons and fire into the Marines and into our cities back where we were and kill a lot of people. It was awful. So the Army, Air Force wouldn't take the, and I'm not beating up on the Air Force, and I'm not beating up on the Marines, I will later. But they would not take the mission. Think about how silly this is. You're in this airplane in enemy territory looking for artillery. Well, guess what the North Vietnamese did? They brought all their anti-aircraft down. So our mission became go destroy the artillery. Well, guess what? We're not stupid. We were getting shot at and hit all the time, so we said, we're going to go destroy the anti-aircraft. Now we got a real war on our hands. And we became famous, and it's not because of individual. We became famous because we sought out the enemy, we took the war to them, and we destroyed their artillery. They kept bringing more down. We found them because of the bird dogs, because of our great backseaters with their binoculars. We learned to fly against the anti-aircraft. All the stuff you see in World War II, or you saw it at Desert Storm with the anti-aircraft coming up. We fought against that, and we learned to fly against it by never flying it. And I'll let Doc talk about that, because he was the first one to go up in North Vietnam and the first one to realize how to go against anti-aircraft fire.
Well, Doc, tell us about the crew. You know, we keep mentioning the backseater and what have you, and we have one here. Would you go ahead and just give us a little synopsis of what was going on?
Well, when I got up there, we had Marines in the back seat. And they had all been trained as TACAIR, naval gun, and artillery qualified. And they had spent at least 6 months or a year in the DMZ or Quezon as company commanders or platoon leaders. And they were sharp troops. When I first went up there, my first mission, Captain Happy, sitting there in the line shack, says, "Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of all the radios for you, tell you where to go, the whole bit." And I said, okay. And we got out there, got in the airplane, and we sat there for about 5 minutes. Finally, he says, "What in the are you doing up there?" I said, "I'm waiting on you to call the tower." He said, "Dummy, you call the tower, I'll talk to everybody else." So then we took off. But those guys in the back seat taught us how to fight a battle up there, recon teams or whatever. But in the back seat, the first part of the, I was up there with the Caterpillars. It was all Marines. And then we got the 108th Artillery in the back seat. Now, Tom Jones over here is the one that we had to coordinate through. He was OIC of Dong Ha Des, Direct Air Support Center of the DMZ. And I would call up and say, I need some TACAIR. He'd say, what kind of ordnance you want, what kind of bomb, whether it be a Delta II or, a 250-pound Chronicle Fin Snake Eye bomb or 500-pound napalm or whatever. But, and he's the guy we called, and I actually took him up in the airplane one time. He wanted to see the DMZ. So that's a story at the end I'm going to tell. But anyhow, when I got up in North Vietnam, none of us knew anything about flying in North Vietnam. So here I go up there, and all of a sudden they had radar control 37, 57, radar control quad 50s. You'd see a beehive, green beehive coming at you. They were all green tracers up there. And I used to pedal this thing as fast as it would go. And I would jerk that thing around and everything, you know, to get away from it. Mainly what we did when they were firing at us with the 37s and all up there, the anti-aircraft, you know, as soon as they'd fire at you, you change your heading about 90 degrees. This is what I did, would save me. And then I would dive 1,000 feet, and that gun would go into a dive mode, and then I would climb and change my heading another 90 degrees to get out of it. But you could smell the coordinate, the burst of the rounds and all around you all the time. I mean, it was a pretty hairy mission. We had no idea what we were getting into. Nobody told us how to fly against them. We just had to learn by ourselves, you know, so it was exciting, people. It was real exciting. And we'd get back at night and talk about it a little bit with the guys. And we were in the first platoon, the ones that flew up in North Vietnam. Charlie and myself and a few others had over 100 missions in North Vietnam in this airplane. So, but we thought everybody down south was fighting like we were. We didn't know, you know, they had an entirely different mission. We were TAC Air qualified. We were some of the very few Army pilots that were TAC Air qualified in order to bring in jets, mark the target, give them a target briefing, and the whole bit. Now, down south, most of the Army pilots had to call in a Air Force 01 or 02 to get TAC Air. But we could get it immediately. I'd call this Tom Jones there, and I said, I need help. And he said, just tell me when to cut it off. And we would just keep pounding.
Yeah.
But North Vietnam was a little bit exciting up there for all of us. And we lost a few guys.
Let me just explain one thing about that maybe you can relate to. When Doc was saying we didn't have any intelligence going up there, picture yourself being in country for 1 week, going up there, and nobody knew what kind of anti-aircraft we had. We didn't know what altitudes to fly at. We didn't know how effective their anti-aircraft were, whether it was 50 cal, whether it was 37 millimeter, and everybody was guessing. Nobody, and this is not criticism, but because we were fighting a war, but nobody knew how effective they were. When we were running airstrikes out there, the poor A4s and F4s, just shoot them out of the air. We didn't know what to do, and we started going low ship and high ship. So Doc would go out and when he got scared, he would go real high. I said, Doc, do you know where I'm at? He said, yeah, you're down there. So where are you at? And I swear, I mean, there's a speck in the air. But his job was to see where I was going to land if I got hit. Now, tell me how silly this mission is, where you're taking 2 pilots, 2 backseaters, and one of them is just to find out where the airplane went down. Well, this, you know, we weren't encouraged. But here's when you are sleeping in the city and you're receiving rockets and artillery fire from North Vietnam, you were very motivated to go find the enemy and take the war to him. And that was the only thing that we felt so proud of because we actually silenced the guns. And remember, now this airplane, we never flew at night. And you can think of reason why. We can't see anything on the ground. You can see a muzzle flash, but it goes in a second. So it was only daylight VFR or IFR. But guess what the North Vietnamese did after a day of fighting? They moved their stupid tracks and they moved their artillery pieces. So it was like every morning you go up and it's like, where'd they go today? Yep. And you would have to, you know, actually try to get them to fire at you. And you could find them.
Charlie, will you give us a typical mission and how long it lasted?
Yeah, Doc will tell you this too. We'd come up from Phu Bai, which is just 45-minute flying time up to Dong Ha. We'd get an observer, and we'd fly 3 hours to 4 hours. The airplane's endurance was about 4 hours and a half. No bathrooms. And there was a break, maybe of 45 minutes, and then you go up there for another 3.5 hours. And then you would fly 45 minutes back to Fubai. So that's an hour and a half, let's say 2 3-hour missions. So now you're looking at, and I did go to Georgia, and it was take me a while to do this, but I think that's somewhere about 7.5 hours. It's close.
I got it.
Okay. So the fatigue factor is your adrenaline's going, so you don't, it's not that. The people that suffered over there were our backseaters that got violently ill from all of our maneuvering, and they threw up a lot, and I would throw up in the back seat the way we flew the airplane. They were the real unsung heroes because they died just like we did. We lost in these airplanes in a period of 6 years. We had 250 people that died in these airplanes, and most of them were from combat losses. They weren't from crashing the airplane. And that was all over the country. Doc and I lost 3 airplanes and 6 crew members in our 6-8 months right there, good friends of ours. But it was the ability of this airplane and their crews to find the enemy that made us so successful because, number one, the North Vietnamese had never had anybody up there with a slow airplane to look at them. They'd send these RF-4s up there, Mohawks up there to film them and look at the IR or infrared. We found them.
But let me tell you one of the typical missions up there. We would be flying along, and Dong Ha Des Tom would call me and said, we got a recon team in contact. And he would give me the frequency, and he would tell me the general area that the guys were. You could get the coordinates because the NBA were listening to you. So you'd start heading in that direction. And they would see you coming. And they say, okay, we're at your 10 o'clock. So I'd turn the airplane, over here and say, okay, now we're at your 1 o'clock. And I'd turn it back and keep going. And then they'd say, mark. And I'd look down and see a guy laying flat on his back with a orange panel stretched over him so I could see him. At that point, I'd open my window, take my M16, fully automatic, back seat would do the same thing, dive for the ground, tracers are coming up, and you go fully automatic. I'd fire with one hand, fly with the other, and go out there in the back seat after we make that one pass to keep the NVA's head down so they could, our guys couldn't maneuver. Back seats cranking up the artillery, and I'm calling Tom Jones again saying, I need some TAC air. And he would get them, he'd start bringing them up on station, whether it be out of Chulai or out of Da Nang with the gunfighters or the love bugs. And once we get them on station, we had a grease pencil that we would mark them as they checked in with us on the windshield so we could see them, as they checked in to us. And then what we would do, we'd have the artillery coming in and trying to put it around the NVA and trying to get our guys to maneuver and where we could put in some bombs. And once we got that in the situation, then we would have the TAC air, and they would come up. I'd shoot one of the rockets out there, and I said, see my hit. And -1, -2, they'd go into a circle pattern because you give them the running, heading, you tell them what the target is, terrain, elevation, which way to turn out, so they would get the least amount of fire, and bring them in. And then what I used to do, when they were coming down about 350, 400 knots, you'd see them coming down on final, and I'd say, -1, you got me in sight? And they'd say, yeah. I said, okay, only way you're gonna fire on friendlies is on top of me, and I'd stay right on top of the friendlies as he went by. And then I would drop the bomb, and then I would rack the airplane in a tight circle and say, -2, you got me in sight, Raj? Okay, you got -1's hit. Let's go 12 o'clock, 50 meters. And I said, only way you drop on friendlies on top of me, and I'd get right on top of the friendlies as he went by. And that's where we used to do it, and just keep working it until we could work the guys out. And to my knowledge, we never lost one. Did you ever lose one, Charlie? Did you know of?
I'm not going to tell you.
Now, you were mentioning M16s. Were you supposed to have M16s?
Yeah, we had them on the airplane. We carried them, and then we had a little small, what was it, 45, Charlie, we used to carry.
So that was the only armament you had, and the rockets were, of course, for spotting.
I had a few CS grenades too. I dropped a few of those a couple of times to suppress them.
Well, now, to avoid the anti-aircraft, you kept doing the juking and the whatever happened to be your way of doing it, and I guess Charlie probably had another way.
Yeah.
No, it was just, yeah, there wasn't anything. The fear will make you move in a lot of different directions very quickly.
It will.
But just picture yourself when he's talking about 2.75, and it doesn't matter what, these are rockets that come out of here. You can actually pick anybody here on the front row. I can almost hit anyone that I want at a certain altitude. I've got to really, really, really risk going as low as I can before I push it off. But these were very accurate. Now, they're not going to be accurate from 3,000 feet, but you can punch them off at 200 to 300 feet. It just takes a little bit of, if you're, I went up to North Vietnam after the bombing halt, and we had trucks. Now, understand that during the bombing halt from President Johnson, he said, nobody can cross the DMZ unless you're being fired at. Well, we got tired of sleeping in bunkers with the rats, and we were starting to take incoming. So one of the things I got recognized for not very nice at the Paris peace talks, I decided to tiptoe in my little airplane and go find some trucks, because we knew the trucks were bringing all the ammunition. We may be only Georgia graduates. We got to figure it out. They're not having these little Vietnamese carry these nice artillery rounds. So I snuck up there, good Marine in my back seat, and we said, we're tired of it. Here comes a truck, 2 of them, and we decided, let's go get them. Rolled in about 400 feet, I don't know, and I armed all 4 rockets to shoot them. Now, I was real smart up to this point. What I did not understand was that if they were carrying munitions, there was going to be a large explosion of my rockets. And sure enough, they did. And I pulled up, and in my wings, there were over 40 different pieces of metal from their munitions. That's hard to explain when you get back home, when you're not supposed to be up to North Vietnam. But that's how silly it was. And how would you think if you were a Marine or a 1st to 5th and you were sleeping in a foxhole right here and you can't fire at him until he fires at you? So we actually would take rocks. We would take anything we could to provoke the North Vietnamese, because we just got tired of taking incoming. Incoming means artillery. It's loud, it's noisy, it kills people. So.
Charlie, how long was your tour of duty?
I stayed there 13 months, and then I extended.
So normal, it would be 13 months for the other guys?
12 and a half months. You always got, by the time you go to R&R and try to make up with your wife, it's 12 and a half months.
Well, Doc, would you tell us about the spring of '68 and the importance of 1968?
Well, what happened when I first got up there in '68, I had the Marines in the back seat, and all of a sudden the Army said we want to go into North Vietnam. And so the Marines decided they weren't going to go with us. And that's when we got the Army 108 to go in our back seat. And they did an exceptional job also. And we were TAC air qualified, and they would run the artillery in the back. But the mission changed drastically at that point. They just told us, from now on, you're going to go up there. We had 2 missions a day, 3 hours each, 6 hours up in North Vietnam. And it was exciting for all of us, but that was the big change for us, because none of us had ever done it before, and we didn't know what to expect on it. But also, Charlie talking about the bombing halt, I remember one time I was frustrated as he was, one time flying along the sea, and I could see him across the Ben Hai River, which was the DMZ. And we were only 15 miles from there, so I knew they were going to hit us. And so I had my back seat. I called Dong Ha desk, Tom over here, and I had the back seat open up with his M16 into the air. And we couldn't fire at them unless they fired at us. So the M16 shooting up in the air, and I'm telling Don Hoddes, I'm taking fire, I'm taking fire. They said, yeah, we can hear it, what do you want? And then we started putting some smoke on them. But that was the main thing there. Yeah, well, you know, just flying up in North Vietnam, people, you can't believe it. But I mean, you go up there, and Tom wanted to see the North Vietnam. He's in the underground bunker and looking at a big map, and that's all they see. And they plotting on that map all the time. So he wanted to go see North Vietnam up there and all the fire bases: Conti, Geraldine, Alpha 3, Charlie 1, our fire bases. So he comes out to the airplane, and when he walked out there, I said, I don't know if this ain't gonna get off the ground. I mean, he had guns, knives, everything hanging off of it. And I got him in the back seat. So he's sitting back there, and I had the windows open back there so he could stay cool, you know. We're flying up on the Z, and so I was showing him the fire bases, and as soon as I crossed that Bend High River, I said, Tom, we're in North Vietnam. And I didn't tell him I was going to do this. I fired all 4 rockets at the same time. He came out of the back seat about and was about ready to shoot me. But anyhow, you know, you have to make it fun up there a little bit. So that's what I did.
How about tell him about the backseater that he had a specific target for you to go to?
I'm sitting in a line shack one day in between missions. And here comes one of the 108 artillery guys, and he's got an M60 machine gun with him with a bunch of bullets. He said, will you take me up there on the Z? I got a target I want to shoot at. I said, okay. So he jumps in the back seat with the M60 machine gun. And I said, okay, where's the target? He says, it's just across the river in North Vietnam. I said, well, what altitude do you want me at? He said, 400 feet. I said, wait a minute. I said, that's a death altitude. They'll shoot us out of the sky. Charlie knows that, either you're on the treetops or 500 feet or better above. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I go up there and I parallel the DMZ there. He's got the gun out there where the target was. I was talking on the intercom, and he had that gun in both hands. Well, he hadn't switched his radio. He was talking to Don Hoddes. And we flying along, and all of a sudden, like that, and it never quit. I said, man, he's gonna burn that barrel up. But I'm trying to hold it steady for him, you know, looking straight ahead. And he's still firing. Finally, something hit me on the back of the head. I turned around and looked. His eyes were that big. He hadn't fired the first round. That was them firing at us. So you do a lot of stupid things, trust me.
Charlie, you got the mission where you got the Silver Star. You were awarded the Silver Star. And would you talk about 25th of October, 1968?
Yeah, I'll make this quick. It's anytime you get...
Don't make it too quick.
I won't. Anytime you get decorated, always remember this. There's always 1,000 other people that probably deserve that decoration. If you're not afraid and you go into the battle, that doesn't show a lot of courage. It's the people that were afraid to go in the battle, the guys on the ground that were scared, terrified because you're on our way. Those were the real heroes. The North Vietnamese were very, very smart, and they were good at what they were doing, and that was killing Americans. What they did was they decided to bring a regiment across the river from here to here. And our military, the 1st, the 5th Infantry, some of the biggest heroes in the world, were bringing their tanks up. Well, the North Vietnamese knew the weather forecast was going to be bad, and we could not get any air support. So therefore, you can't get any artillery directed at this enemy. So what happens is the 1st, the 5th were all mechanized. They were on tanks. Well, once the North Vietnamese destroyed their tanks, now all of a sudden we've got this infantry guy that's used to fighting with tanks. Now he's off the tank and now he's fighting. They're getting their fannies kicked. And they're on the radios. There was just a couple of us up, and the weather prevented I flew, I don't know, 8 hours that day. But what happened was nobody could see the battlefield but me in my back seat. And what we did was we flew low and we saved the guys on the ground. And that's not saving them, but we gave them directions. We gave them where the North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese want to get real close to you where they can just lob mortars after mortars after mortars. They want to engage the enemy almost combat, almost hand to hand. That's how close they want it. Well, what we did, we, just like Doc was saying, we used our M16s, and you know, I could fire at them. I don't know whether I hit them, but I disabled the gun. But it's mainly just keeping their heads down so that the guys on the ground that are losing their friends can disengage and get away from them. And you have rope bridges and everything else. One thing that we didn't know, this is how stupid we were up there. Underneath, we always thought because of the water table that they couldn't dig down and hide. They had cities under there. They had hospitals under there. And when they kept coming out of this railroad bed, we were killing them right and left, and they're like little ants. We couldn't understand where they were coming until after the war. Some of our comrades went into the DMZ and they said, Jesus, no wonder they could live down there. Again, our intelligence wasn't very good. Then one thing the North Vietnamese, and I hope they're not listening, one thing they do really, really, really dumb is they run fast. Well, that catches your eye. If they would have just walked slow, we would have never seen them. But they just, I don't know, something about the Asians. They like to run fast. If you've ever been to Japan or Korea, they like to run fast. Well, in North Vietnam, they really like to run fast. And it's hard to run when you got napalm coming at you, but we got a lot of them. And the volume of the North Vietnamese coming across the river, we would see them. You could actually fly into North Vietnam. Remember, there's a bombing halt, and you could actually see them taking training, doing driving skills. You could actually see them doing PT. You could see them cooking. It was nothing to go up there and see 150, 200, not more than 10 miles away where you're living. And that was always the bizarre thing of the war. So anyway, on the day that I got decorated, I stayed up there 7 hours. I brought the USS New Jersey in. What I did with them, because they're not real accurate, we had them sitting off there, and we'd bring their 16-inch shells here to block any more of you guys from coming south. Now, they don't have any reserves. So now, the people that they thought was going to reinforce them, we were killing so many of them here, they thought they were going to reinforce. New Jersey stayed in the back. And finally, about 6 o'clock that night, we got a couple airstrikes in, and it was so easy. One other thing about the Air Force and the Marines, flying their A4s and F4s, they always hear about how many MiGs they shot down and all this stuff way up north. Those guys running close air support with those F4s and A4s were some of the most accurate, some of the bravest pilots we ever put with. Because we would tell them, guys, you're taking fire. And then Doc will tell you this last thing. We would bring the F4 pilots and put them on our back seat so they could actually see what anti-aircraft and hear what it's like. They're not real brave in a 90 mile an hour airplane, I can tell you that. They'd always say, let's get out of here, let's get out of here. Okay, I'm full throttle. This is it. I don't have burner. But what we actually got them to do was run airstrikes from the back seat. Now that's just like Doc and I talking to each other. There'd be gunfighter 1, 2's in, 1's in. And they would just lob these wonderful napalm canisters. And I'm not saying it's fun to kill people, but when they're shooting you, it's fun to kill people. And you see those little canisters, and I'm not going to get gory about it, but those are the most effective thing. And then they would come down with their 20 Mike guns and kicking that rudder pedal and just putting steel in the enemy. And it was neat. But they learned a good lesson sitting in our back seats. And I think Doc had some F4 pilots in his back seat.
Well, Charlie, you happened to mention the New Jersey. I wouldn't even bring this up except you brought it up. Tell us about the time you went AWOL and you went to the New Jersey.
A good friend of mine, Roger Bounds, I had flown up there and we landed, and he said, let's go out to New Jersey. Okay, we had a helicopter. In Vietnam, you can get a ride anywhere. We took a helicopter, landed on New Jersey. So it was about September. This was cool. So we basically went AWOL. And so I actually got to be right there with Bob Hope and Ann Margaret. Thank you very much. And Roger Smith never left her side, and I don't thank him very much. But that was the most incredible thing, because we actually got to sit on the New Jersey with Captain Ed Snyder, rest his soul, just died, to see him lob the 16-inch guns, and we stayed on there for 2 days. And yes, I was AWOL, and nobody knew where I was, but at that time, I didn't care. And they had to fly my missions.
Well, we're fortunate enough that Colonel Jones is here, and would you tell us a little bit about your function while you were in Vietnam?
Sure. Marine Corps had observation aircraft, but in the period that Doc and Charlie are talking about, they pulled the Marine Corps pilots back and that squadron back to transition from the O-1, which they were flying, to OV-10. And the Army took over the mission of guarding the DMZ. The Marine Division was spread out side by side, regiments side by side along the DMZ. As I recall, at that point in South Vietnam where the DMZ started, it was only 18 miles long from the Laotian border over to the ocean. So my function was with the division headquarters at a place called Dong Ha, which was about 8 miles back behind the DMZ, but well within the artillery ring. And we managed all of the aircraft and coordinated with the Fire Support Coordination Center, which was a division artillery center. So we plotted all the artillery fires. We tried to route helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft around those artillery fires so we didn't have to shut them down. And then we functioned as the intermediary for Doc and his guys to bring fixed-wing aircraft, typically out of Da Nang, which was about 30 minutes away, and into the northern I Corps, which is what the Marine area was called. I can't say enough about what Doc and Charlie's guys did. They saved a lot of lives. I don't think you'd ever hear anybody who was there on the ground in that era have anything but high praise for the Cat Killer Squadron. Did a super job. The fact of the matter was that if they weren't up for some reason, if the weather closed in or something, that didn't prevent the NVA artillery from firing. But when there were Cat Killers airborne along the DMZ, they were a little more hesitant, because they knew if they got spotted that there would be some fixed-wing aircraft with heavy ordnance on them pretty shortly, once the location was known. I'd like to tell my side of Doc's tale about my ride into North Vietnam. First of all I wanted to see was the south area where we were working below the DMZ, so I'm sitting back there fat, dumb, and happy. And I look down, and there's a distinguishing landmark called Finger Lakes, which I knew was north of the Z, and we're over it. Now, you got to remember that the last airplane I'd been in was the F-4. Couldn't hear anything, closed canopy. I wasn't very comfortable, as Charlie alluded to, flying around up there at 90 miles an hour. It felt like you were in a kite. And for the first time in my life, I'm thinking getting on the ground is not a good thing here. It's not safe. That's usually your aspiration, is to get it back on the ground. Anyway, I had fired 2.75 rockets in the F-4. You can't hear them go off in that closed cockpit. So, first of all, I said, hey, he said, yeah. And I said, well, we're in North Vietnam. He said, yeah. Like, what's the big deal? And then a little bit after that, he cranked off all 4 of those rounds, and I knew we were dead. I know they'd blown a wing off or something, and we were gone. So anyway, that's the other side of the story. But for all of the Marines that served on the ground in that area, I really like to thank the Cat Killers. They saved a lot of people's lives.
Thank you, sir. We have time for some questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Charlie, first off, I'm not happy being on the North Vietnamese side. But when you guys were training at Fort Rucker, you said like 1 in 100 was fixed wing. The other were helicopter pilots. Did you guys have a choice?
You beg for fixed wing. Helicopter pilots, you know, I'm sure people here either have relatives. Yeah, they were losing too many people. 15,000 helicopters were destroyed in Vietnam. Think about that. That's why we wanted to fly fixed wing.
It was all those 19-year-old warrant officers. Yeah.
How did you navigate if you didn't have, was it all visual and dead reckoning? And what altitudes did you go in and out at?
Well, no, we didn't have any navigation. They had I don't even know, they had a TAC can, I think, up at Dong Ha, but we didn't have any equipment like that. That was Star Wars stuff to this airplane. All we had was ADF, and we navigated strictly by maps. And if you couldn't read a map, you were going to get lost up there. And normally, the normal altitude would be about 1,000 feet or long as until you started finding some targets, and you would get down low and really take a look at them and see if you get fire and all that. But 1,000 feet was fairly safe unless you went up in North Vietnam, and then 2,000 to 3,000 feet up there.
Question for you. When you first got over to the Cat Killers, were the Marines still flying the Charlies?
They certainly
Okay.
were.
How many
And, you know,
times?
Finish your question, and I
I
will
was
tell
wondering-
you that they deliberately crashed them all because they did not like the mission. And I swear to God they did that.
Well, I flew with them a little bit in the Charlies.
They were good.
Wasn't
You guys
that?
were good.
I was wondering if they were still borrowing your airplanes, because I know a couple times I was supposed to go up from division headquarters, and I say, "Well, you can't go. We're using an Army plane today."
Yeah. Were you a fingerprint?
No, I was with Division Air Office.
Okay. Let me tell you about the Marine 01 pilots. They were superb. Remember what a lot of the Marine 0 pilots were. They were hero F4A4 pilots, and all of a sudden the Marines put them in this little 90-knot Bird Dog. You don't think they wanted to crash that Bird Dog? Of course they did. They wanted to go back to Chulai and fly the fighters and be heroes. That is true. My story.
That's right.
Oh, gentlemen, how are you? Sergeant Charles Rika, 3-4 Cav. When I was over, we were supported observation mission mostly by UAVs and Kiowa scouts. How do you see the that role and the mission you guys perform constantly evolving with the new machinery that's available?
Don't get me started.
And thank you, gentlemen, for all the work
No,
you do.
thank you for what you do. On the unmanned vehicles, I was, as an 06 at Fort Rucker, I was a group commander, and I sent a lot of people to the desert and everything else like that. You know, they were all helicopter pilots, flying the Loach and everything else. They actually wanted the Bird Dog, but we couldn't get it. We couldn't sustain it. We couldn't support it maintenance-wise. But it was a great aircraft for observation. High wing, you can see everything in the world. So what you're doing, because a lot of the guys I sent to flight school are coming back and talk about the UAV. It's a similar mission, except you guys get standoff, and then you can kill them without a whole lot of noise. It's great.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Misties? Absolutely. Did you correlate any of your missions with them?
They were great, but they worked deep up in North Vietnam. We brought the Misties once in a while, particularly for SARs, for CR rescues, and we got people shot down, in North Vietnam. But remember, and when you were talking about navigation, this is really, really simple navigation until you went over to Laos. It's simple navigation. Everything's flat, not a whole lot of mountains except Khe Sanh. So you could navigate. And plus we had Highway 1, and then we had the ocean over here. Wasn't real hard. But the Misty Facts were good, but they were going too fast to see what we saw. But they were good. I mean, we called on them all the time. They were cool.
Yes, sir.
Well, you guys were great and so forth. Now back to the airplane. We all hear stories about how some of these Warbirds have come back badly shot up. What story can you tell us about that airplane coming back with a third of a wing missing, or what the heck ever?
Took an artillery round all the way through the wing, came back, self-sealing fuel tanks. One of our good friends had an 8-inch, I think it was 8-inch, but anyway, went right through the windscreen. He flew it back. I helped him. It's in the book. I took, tons of hits. You gotta do something really, really bad to shoot one of these things down.
And one time I hit a tree and flew it back, believe it or not. This wing hit it about in there, and it flattened it about that far. And I called the maintenance officer. I said, man, I hit a tree. I was chasing a gook down the trail, and there was a dead tree sticking up, and I didn't see it, and bam. And so I ended up calling the maintenance officer. He says, taxi straight in the hangar, and I'll have people cut the tin off before the old man gets out here. And they did. I pulled in before the prop was stopped. They were cutting that metal off. Old man walked out. Maintenance said, oh, he hit a bird.
Thanks again, folks. We really appreciate it.